Welcome back everyone, Andrew Moore here, and today we're talking about buying your first property in Australia. Today I'm going to be breaking down the steps for you in exactly if you decide, hey, I want to buy my first property, what do you actually do? Including working out your borrowing capacity, getting a pre-approval, when do you actually start looking for a property, how to do your research, making offers, negotiating on the actual purchase, what happens after you buy a property, a valuation, how does that come into play, and then finally the settlement process. So if that's what you're looking for, stay tuned. First steps first, before we go looking to buy a house, we need to know how much can we actually borrow. How much you can borrow is determined simply by a few combined factors. How much you make, how much you have saved, and how much the particular bank that you're speaking to will lend you. Instead of going straight to the bank, you should consider speaking to a mortgage broker, because a mortgage broker actually compares all the different banks for you, which is incredibly important because depending on the bank, they will lend you different amounts based on their own independent policy around something called LVR, which is loan to value ratio. Have I lost you yet? Stick with me, I'll explain. Loan to value ratio is, as it sounds, the amount of the loan compared with the value of the property. Simply put, to give you guys an example, if we're buying a property for $1 million and we're borrowing $800,000, then we would have an LVR of 80% because 800,000 is 80% of $1 million, which is the value of the property. Some banks will lend you up to 90% LVR for an investment property, and some banks will lend as high as 98% when you're owner occupying, or simply put, moving into the property. So if you go directly to your local bank, they may tell you that you can only borrow $500,000, but with another bank who has a different policy around LVR, and they might lend at a higher LVR, they might lend you $600,000. The easiest thing to do, rather than walking around to every single bank inquiring as to how much they will lend you, simply call a mortgage broker and they'll do all the work for you. A mortgage broker should be able to put together a cost scenario for you based on what it is you're wanting to achieve. If you say you want to buy a property for $600,000, this is your deposit and you're ready to go, then they should be able to tell you how much that property for $600,000 is going to cost you and how much you actually need saved. Once they do that, then they can compare the banks, tell you the amount that you can borrow with each bank, and also who has the best interest rate. Moving on, the second step in the process is, of course, getting a pre-approval for a loan. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking, hey, I'll go and get a loan once I find a property that I actually want to buy. No, don't do that. A lot of people think that, but don't do that. What you actually need to do is obtain something called a pre-approval. Going to the bank and getting them to review your financials is not as quick as some people think. Sometimes people will ring me and say, hey, Andrew, I want a loan, and I'm going to bid on Saturday. And I say to them, it's Friday today. Do you mean tomorrow? And they say, yes. No. Having a bank review all your financials can take a week with some banks, and it can take a month with other banks. So depending on who you're going with, you need to allocate some time. What you can actually do is get a pre-approval, which is where the bank goes through all your financials, determines that they're happy to lend you the money that you're requesting. And that way then, once you find a property, you can actually submit that property to the bank and then go for a formal approval. At least having the pre-approval though, you know that the bank will actually lend you the money, so you can go and make an offer subject to finance on a property and actually start buying a property. Because what a lot of people do is they say, hey, I've found a property that I want to make an offer on. They wait for the bank to give them a response, and in that time, the property sells. You don't want that property to sell while you're waiting for the bank. Get a pre-approval. Once you have that pre-approval, it is time for step number 3 in the process, which is to start looking. Now that you know how much you can spend, you can narrow down a few different options. Of course, you want to work out the type of property that you want. Do you want an apartment? Do you want a townhouse? Do you want a house? Who knows? You also need to consider the area that you want to live in, and then you need to look at the budget the pre-approval has set out for you. So if you're pre-approved up to $600 and you really want a house, then you're going to need to find an area that you can afford a house for $600,000. However, if you only need an apartment, then you might be able to get a better area than you could have if you bought the house for $600,000 and spend $600,000 on an apartment. Also, if you plan on turning that property into an investment property down the track, then you may want to consider, is the area good for investment before you buy that property just because it's cool. Step number 4 is do your research. And what I mean by this is, let's say you want to buy a 2-bedroom unit. How are you going to know how much to pay for that 2-bedroom unit in the area? Well, you do your research. And what I mean by do your research is look at every single 2-bedroom unit that is on the market. Look at every single 2-bedroom unit that is in the sold section of realestate.com. But most importantly, you need to walk through the properties, because then when you find the perfect 2-bedroom unit for you, you can compare it to all of those other 2-bedroom units that you walked through that were terrible. And you can say, wow, the price actually looks really good for this one, and this one's really attractive, and the one that I hated was right next to the train line sold for this much. So then you can get a pretty good idea that you're gonna have to make a pretty strong offer if you want to secure that property. On the flip side, you may have seen a property that was way better than the property that you actually want to buy, and that may have sold for less than what they're asking, so then you know you should offer less. We are flying through these right now. I'm impressed with you guys for hanging in there. You guys are going to be able to buy a house after this, provided of course you got a deposit and you get a pre-approval. And it's a few steps. Step number 5 is making offers. Now, what a lot of people think about when they're making an offer and they start to procrastinate is, what if I pay too much? What if I buy the wrong property? What happens if my parents don't approve? But have no fear, because if you did everything that I asked you to do in the step number 4, which was do your research, which I know you did, then you're fine, because you know exactly what to offer, because you know whether the property's overpriced or you know whether it's underpriced. The most important thing when it comes to making offers is clean offers are good, so not a lot of conditions. Sometimes first home buyers have a tendency to slap every condition under the sun on the contract because you're really, really nervous. So I want a building inspection, I want subject to finance, I want a lollipop man to give me a lollipop at settlement, and I also want a raincoat. The more conditions that you actually put on the offer, a lot of the time you can actually put the seller off taking your offer, even if you're the highest in price, which is something a lot of first home buyers don't often get. However, if you are nervous, then it's totally fine to put all the conditions you want. The main condition I'd actually advise is subject to finance, and most owners understand this. However, if you are up against another offer that is a similar price and they're not subject to finance and you are, chances are you're going to miss the property. But I'd still go subject to finance just to be safe. Negotiation. Are you talking to me? Sorry guys, it's getting late. I don't even know what accent that was. Negotiation, this is step number 6. Once you made an offer on a property, you are going to end up in a negotiation. It is very, very rare that the real estate agent is going to take your offer, go to the owner and say, congratulations, you have bought yourself a property. What is far, far more likely to happen, and if they're any kind of real estate agent, they should really try and get you up in price, which is what they're gonna do. The real estate agent's gonna come back and say, the owner declined your offer, you need to increase your offer. It is their job to get you to offer the maximum that you're prepared to offer for the property. And this is where you need to consider a few things. How many other people did you see at the open house, and do you actually think there's legitimately a lot more buyers competing for this? How much were other properties selling for, and does the property justify increasing your offer based on the other properties that you have seen sell? And how much do you really want it? Because if you really, really want the property, then it may be worth just increasing your offer and getting the property, because over 30 years, it's really not going to make a lot of difference to your mortgage repayments if you pay $10,000 extra. However, if you don't really care about buying that specific property, then I would try and haggle a little bit more, stand your ground, and see whether they're willing to take your offer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is a long list. Like, really long. Like, I know I was joking around telling you guys that we're going to be here a while, but gotta go through 7 steps just to buy a house? Well, you don't, but it'll help. So stick with me. We're on the home stretch. So after you buy, what actually happens? Well, the real estate agent is going to want you to pay a deposit. Now that deposit is typically 10% of what the value of the property is. Now this can be negotiated on the contract of sale when you're making your offer. So if you only have a 5% deposit and you're applying for 95% loan or 95% LVR as we learned earlier, then you need to negotiate that when you're making an offer, because the real estate agent typically is going to assume you're paying a 10% deposit. Furthermore, if you're buying a property off the plan or you're buying a house and land package, the deposit is likely to be a lot lower. Now, when I say that, I don't want to confuse anyone. I'm not saying you need less money in order to buy off the plan or buy a house and land package. What I'm saying is the real estate agent will require you to put down a smaller deposit. You'll still need the same amount of money to settle the same size loan with the bank. Step number 8 is the valuation. So once you've actually bought the property, you've negotiated everything, you've got that contract in your hand, your mortgage broker or the bank manager, if you went directly to the bank, is going to ask you for a copy of that contract. What they're going to do then is they're going to order a bank valuation. Now this is to help the bank determine the final LVR. 99% of the time, I have experienced that the valuation comes in exactly at whatever the contract price is. Occasionally, it'll come in below that. So what happens if we have a shortfall in the valuation and the valuation comes in less than what you paid for the property? Normally, if you're borrowing 80% of what the property is worth and the valuation comes in short and you need to then borrow more money to make up the difference, then your LVR is going to be a little bit higher. As a result of your LVR being a little bit higher, you might have a slightly higher interest rate. In very extreme circumstances, and this has never happened to me, but in the event that the bank will not lend you any more money because you're already borrowing the absolute maximum that you can, and the valuation also came in short, which is kind of like finding a unicorn, then you would have to somehow come up with the extra 10,000 if that's how much the valuation is short. So this is where I say maybe offering subject to finance when it's your first property and money is a little bit tighter and you're trying to stretch yourself to get into that first property is a good idea, just so you're protected. So if something does happen, like a shortfall in a valuation, which again is very, very unlikely, you know you're covered. And then you have settlement. People often ask me, what is settlement, Andrew? Well, that is basically where your bank will pay the seller all of the money that you agreed to for the property. The property will be changed into your name, so you actually officially own the property, and you also get the favorite part of most buyers, the keys to the house. You are going to have to organize a conveyancer who will actually be the person that switches all of the titles around, so moves it from the seller's name into your name, so you officially own the property. They'll also handle the transfer of the money from the bank to the seller, and that's a pretty important process, and you do have to have a conveyancer. Now, conveyancers typically charge somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 in my experience. And a conveyancer, when you're first starting to look and you're looking at the contract and you go, I don't know how to read a real estate contract, we'll actually look over the contract for you. So it's better off getting one right at the start of the process than all the way at the end of the process where I actually put it into the steps. So sorry about that. And there you have it, guys. That is the complete process to buying a property in Australia. I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that this helps you buy your first property. And if it does, leave me a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, then please give me a like. It really does help out. Subscribe if you're not already, and I will see you guys on the next video.